Live. Oh, welcome everybody. I am so happy to see you guys. And if you're not watching right now, later on, I'm really glad that you've taken the time to come out to our very last show of podcast of the year. This is the podcast we called Our Last Words of 2023. So we want to cover a couple of different topics today. First of all, we're going to talk about is the topic of with my dear co-leader. Is co-leaders would be the right other leaders. I was going to say trio leaders. Anyways, with Kat, Todd, and myself, and we are your podcasters for today. And the thing I want to kick off with is this question of for all of us is if you look at the retrospective of this past year, what stands out for you guys? Like what little trinkets of goals of all the from the podcast. And you guys don't want to hear about my business and how it went, but let's talk about the podcast. How the podcast went this year. Mm-hmm.
I'll start if that's okay. Yeah. Wow, this has been such an interesting year. And not just on the podcast, although also on the podcast. And I think the thing, like I was going through the back catalog on YouTube just to sort of see what there was. And the one that really stood out for me was the one about, when leaders make choices and they feel like they're trapped, right? I think some of the language we used in it was like, when leaders feel like they made a deal with the devil, and
yes.
and right, and where, what can you do from there? And the reason that was so resonant for me was because I've been there. I've been in that space where I feel or felt like I got to the place where I'd done the stuff, I'd achieved the success according to all of the metrics that, success was supposed to be measured against. And when I got there, I was unfulfilled. And I looked at it and went, oh my goodness, what have I done? And how can I get out of this? And it didn't seem like there was a choice. And it took a long time to get there. And part of and I'll share this too. I think this is one of the reasons why it was so resonant and why it actually kind of made me a little emotional is part of the process of realizing that I had choice was doing this with you two.
Oh,
yeah. Nice. It's that recent. So yeah.
And that was, sorry. So this one, just for everyone, the viewers, it's podcast number 16, right? Making choices you regret was the name of that, right? That was the one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the one. Making choices you regret. Yeah, because I've got a bunch of those.
I remember you having a pretty visceral reaction in that one. Like when we started talking about it, you really had like a moment of clarity in that one.
Yeah, that one. So that was a big aha for me. That was, I think, listen, I loved all of them. They were all really good. And right at the very beginning, we talked about ChatGPT because it had just come out. And like that was super fun too.
Oh my gosh, it feels like it's been around for a while.
Yeah, I know, right? We started talking about a year ago.
I know. It's interesting. Oh my gosh, yeah.
Oh my. How about you, Joanne?
Actually, there's two of them. I'm just going to look at it. So the YouTube channel, we should actually post a link to it from this too. But so the two that really got me was the episode 14, which is when ideas and organizations die. And then episode 13, which is, are you allergic to the word accountability? Right. And I mean, I love the creative title about allergic to accountability. But I think those two particular ones, when organizations and ideas should die, like what do we do? Right? We don't talk about this. Like we don't talk about the death of a product, or we don't prepare, like we were talking about there. We don't prepare for the death of these things, right? Like there's no
Yeah.
corporate death doula, right? Walking around. Hey, maybe that's a new title for 2024, the corporate death doula, right? But I don't think we're actively kind of doing that, other than probably people are writing off stuff, like, you know, when they have to at the very end. But we don't prepare for that. And I think we need to prepare for these things that you know, this thing, when it, like, how do we know when it's going to die? Like when, you know, but it may not be at the very beginning, but at a certain point in time, I think we should start. I think that conversation is required. Right. So I thought that was really good. And then are you allergic to accountability? Like, it's just like everyone was, you need to be more accountable. You need to be more accountable. You know, you hear that a lot. That's out there. I'm sure a lot of people are sick and tired of it. Like, I'm doing the best that I can, you know, with what I can. And then there's the accountability aspect of it, like just doing the things which, you know, we're obligated to do. We're not really thinking anymore. We're just, you know, just doing what we need to do and just kind of like, okay, you know, so that just feels like there's no agency, right? That's there, right? So, I expect that, you know, if you have that allergic reaction, it's probably because you want to have more agency, right? Like, I want to do stuff because I want to do it, not just because you're telling me to do it, right? So that gets me really curious, right? And I really like those two. And the only other thing I would sit there and say from a retrospective perspective is just looking back at this year is I didn't realize we would do so many. Like, we were doing them every 2 weeks or every 2 to 3 weeks. We just kept on going. It's just like, for this little idea of us, you know, coming together and talking about it, and we were just having a great time talking. Right. Yep. Which is awesome. Which went, oh, why don't we just do this on a podcast? I went, perfect. You know, so I'm grateful for that. It just kept on going. And I'm sure our minds, because they're so curious, have a lot of other things that we want to talk about. So anyways, Kat, well, what came up for you for this last I was curious.
It's actually echoing what both of you talked about. So I went back and watched a few of the episodes again, and there were a lot more than I thought we had. But the ones that I went back, especially some of the early ones, the message that kept coming back for me is basically what I've sort of been thinking about for a few years, which is any change we want to make from now on is going to be dependent on us being able to change ourselves, right? So it's a matter of, So it's a matter of, Todd, what you did and what you just talked about, which is really recognizing what's really happening, right? And that's hard to do. So that's difficult. Step number one is to actually take an honest inventory or an honest assessment, not just of the facts around us, but actually the facts of what's happening inside of our bodies, what's happening inside of our minds, what kind of games are we playing with ourselves, right? Because a lot of people, we talked about this before we went live, where a lot of people sort of talk about feeling the fear and doing it anyways. But I actually think what most leaders do is they ignore the fear and do it anyways. Exactly, suppressing. And that always comes back to haunt us for two reasons. Number one, we're not dealing with the real emotions we've got, and our bodies don't let go until we've dealt with the emotions. So problem number one. And problem number two is we're completely missing a lot of really critical information by not listening to ourselves. And then the second part is, Joanne, what you're getting at, which is the grieving cycle, the letting go, the unlearning. There's actually quite a few words we have for what we need to do in terms of this letting go, which you guys talked about. The two of you did a great podcast last 2 weeks ago. We talked about it with the death doula, the corporate grieving and making room for things to end. We also talked about it a few times. I think we've used the word unlearning a few times in some of our podcasts, and there's many, many, many other words. But so we have the words for it, but we don't do it yet. And I think that goes to our culture. So we're taught to repress our emotions, and very few people have ever learned how to use their emotion as a source of information, right? And we also generally don't talk about any type of death or ending unless it's a Hollywood ending, because
Right.
we don't have many people don't have the emotional maturity to deal with death, right?
Mhm.
We're constantly striving to live forever. We're constantly living in denial of death. We're constantly trying to do everything to avoid having to think about it in any way. And it's not a pleasant subject, but at the same time, if we can start befriending this idea of every cycle has an end, therefore every life has an end. And obviously, I want mine to be long and healthy and fun, just like all the initiatives that I engage in. I want them to be long and healthy and fun. But the reality is, they're going to have an end.
Mhm.
And if we can really embrace that and then make the most of what we can in the time we have, we can actually be more powerful. We can be more joyful,
Mhm.
be more authentic. I hate that word, but yeah. So that's what came up. There's so many words that are just so overused.
Yeah.
But that's really what came out for me. And really the root of all of that is what we started with this idea of curiosity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's so interesting because one of the themes I think that you've touched on, Kat, is that we really have talked a lot about
Mm.
unlearning
Yeah.
and the way that we've done things and it
Mhm.
not being knowing what doesn't serve us
Mhm.
and all of that stuff. And Joanne, I love the conversation we had last week about what do we need to let go of as we go into the next
Mhm.
year. But all of that, one of the things that's observing and coming up for me is like that's great, and especially after the last episode, like I've taken a real serious look, and I've started doing like some really serious work, and what am I not bringing with me into the next year?
Nice.
It is, and it's really powerful. And
Yeah.
this morning, as I was journaling, and I hope you're proud of me because I'm actually journaling now. But this
Yeah.
morning, as I was journaling, one of the things that popped into my head was like, well, but what am I bringing with me?
Mm.
Like, what do I get to keep? And that became really exciting too,
Mm. So,
because it's
okay.
both and it's not either or.
Okay, so this is really cool because you kind of like brought us into the next conversation,
Oh, I did.
right?
I
Yeah,
didn't do it on purpose.
no, but it was great because okay. So I'm going to try and tie it into the
Sure.
next portion, which is, what do we see is coming up in 2023? Because I think,
yeah.
or 2024, sorry,
Yep.
because I think you've chosen what you want to bring into 2024. And I think you've chosen it for a reason, right?
Mhm.
To prepare what is coming up, right?
Mhm.
Or you chose to let go because you know
Mhm.
that will not serve you in 2024.
Mhm.
So let's just spend a few minutes and explore what do we think is coming up in 2024. So where does our curiosity go is in terms of what we think is going to be happening, because we talked about like a polycrisis, right?
Yeah,
Which is
that's true.
and what do we think is what do we think is going to be showing up in 2023?
Mhm.
So who wants to start?
Can I jump in?
Ooh,
Oh
yes.
yeah.
I'm quite excited about this one because it's one of these things where, am I allowed to swear on this podcast? I don't think we've ever
It's our-
discussed that.
I think
Do
it's
your
our
students
podcast.
hear it? Because they want to hear it.
It's our podcast. You get to swear whenever you want.
All right. Life is shit. Like it
Oh, my
really.
ears.
Oh my God.
I could go further, but I think I made the point. Life is going to hell in a handbasket, whatever. Like it's, polycrisis. And the first place that I heard this term polycrisis is from Nate Hagen's Great Simplification podcast.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that's where it originates from, but that's where I heard it first. And it's basically, it doesn't matter. And I'm laughing because there is a happy part to this. So we're in this polycrisis, which basically means every way we turn, we're just seeing everything falling apart. And again, I'm trying not to swear because really it makes me angry at how bad our situations are because everything is avoidable. Everything that we're facing was avoidable, but for a range of reasons, people chose not to, right? And it's conscious choice, unconscious choice. Yeah, it's conscious and unconscious choice, but nevertheless, we did have choices. So I'm furious about that. But and now with the COP28 is just such a joke. Like it's just, and again, I'm laughing because I'm like, good. The more things fail, the more that people are going to get hurt. And I do not wish any injury or any pain on anybody that's unnecessary, especially for the people that really don't have any choice in this situation. But the beautiful thing is it's mobilizing people. And, the sheer anger that has arisen, and COP28 technically hasn't ended yet. Whether they end up making a decision over this really ridiculous word, that was hard, a really ridiculous word. Are they going to, I can't remember what the word is, are they going to reduce oil and gas consumption, or are they going to phase it out? I think those are the two words that they're arguing over. And it's like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, what? I had to say it, sorry. Like, it's, there's not a credible scientist in the world that is saying we could reduce and go on. And is there a lot of room in terms of phase out, in terms of how we do that? I lived in Alberta. I come from Western Canada, so I'm not anti-oil and gas. I understand how many jobs are at stake. I understand how important it is for our economy. I also fully recognize that we actually won't be able to phase out oil and gas for a long time because we won't be able to scale up enough alternative energy. So I'm going off on a tangent, but I mean, so there's all these things that are like unbelievable that we're in this poly crisis and we're just keep bloody digging the hole. Here's the happy part. Here's why I'm smiling, or was smiling before I went off on my tangent. The fact that so many people are mobilizing, the fact that so many people are getting angry. Now, there's two directions that people can go in. They can go into the destroy everything, look out for myself, hunker down, don't care about anybody else. And then there's the people who are probably the ones that are listening to us and the people that we talk to on a regular basis that really are trying to figure out, how do we engage? How do we actually become part of the real solution? And instead of looking for ready-made solutions, how do we actually look systemically? How do we look at the whole systems, plural, and really think about how do we change the system so we can actually come up with not just ways to mitigate the situation, but how do we actually make life more thriving? How do we make things better? Like, it's regenerative is actually really beautiful when you think about what's possible. So yeah, that was a very long answer. Sorry, but it really...
She's passionate, folks. Passionate.
Yeah. It is. Well, and rightly so. And I think that what's really interesting to me is where curiosity plays a part in that, because in one of our 100%. Earlier conversations, I and I can't take credit for this word. I may have used it here before, but on one of the podcasts that I listened to, there was a climate scientist who a climate activist who described herself as a radical centrist. And what she meant was, she really genuinely needs to know what's going on both sides. Of and that's hard. That's hard when you've got passionate views in one direction or the other. But I'm thinking of that book, The Anatomy of Peace. Was it The Anatomy of Peace, where it was, okay, maybe it wasn't The Anatomy of Peace. It was something that I heard recently where someone said, what if you can just sort of accept that the other person that you're talking to is X% right, like 5% right.
Yeah.
Could you be curious about that 5%?
Yeah.
What's there?
And that's hard to do without curiosity. You can't.
Well, I'd say it's impossible to do without curiosity. Oh man, what's coming up for you? What's coming up, Joanne?
Yeah, well, I think I can feel Katrina and was trying to spice it up with a little bit of laughter, but I do really feel that what we're up against this next year is just going to be worse than it was this year, unfortunately. Yep. And I do think that this is going to invoke, more deep. I would say it may evoke more anxiety, more depression. Could invoke more trauma, could invoke, despair in people, right? So, and I think we may see this more in our work than we've ever done before, more in our families than we've ever done before.
Yeah.
but I do really like what you're saying, Kat, that it's just like, because we're hearing more and more about this, I think more and more people are talking about it, so more people are
Yeah.
being curious about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing. I can tell you, by the way, that if no one has done this, I'd really truly love it if they could do it, because I think it's an amazing experience, and that's The Week. Well, Frederick Laloux's The Week is an amazing process, and I'm just in the middle of doing that with Lisa Atkins right now.
Okay.
And she's trying to get 10,000 Agilas through it for this next year. And what it does is it does explore the state that we're in. So it's almost like it's very depressing, the first part of the you, like it's upsetting, right? It really is upsetting. But you can't leave there. You can't. So they go through that upsetting phase, and then they kind of give you at the bottom, you're starting to get into, maybe there is a little bit of hope, right? That we could do something. And then we come back up with ideas of what we can actually do. So, but it's an amazing U theory process that I would really highly, highly recommend.
Is that based on Otto Scharmer's Theory U?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, brilliant. That's brilliant.
And it's amazing. And I think it does talk about, for people who can work with it. I mean, I would sit there and do it earlier than later. I think it'll give you. It's almost like clearing out the sciences with horseradishes.
Wow.
It's just like it's going to really help you process. I know it's a really odd
or
kind
curing
of thing.
hookups with vinegar, like I did right before
Exactly.
the
Yeah, but it is processing, and it is beautiful, and they are absolutely lovely and beautiful. And I love it because they're not the type of people that are Frederick and his wife are doing it with a bunch of other people, and they don't do it with fear or blame or shame.
Wow.
Shame. Like, they don't do it with blame and shame. They're
wonderful.
not fearing you, but you will sense it once you go through it.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Joanne, is there a link that we could post in the comments after we're done?
I think so. I'll give it to you, and then you guys can sign up for it. And I know that Lisa, like I said, is trying to get 10,000 people through.
I'd love to do it, and I bet some of our listeners would love to do it too.
Yeah, well, and you know what? And I'm okay to kind of hold it too, so we can hold it together. So we can hold it as a group, and we can hold it to whoever listeners are there. And I'd be more than happy to kind of do that, and we can do that with Lisa's stuff. So that'd be really great.
Okay. Fantastic.
So Polycrisis, hell yeah, there's gonna be there's gonna be a lot of stuff that's gonna, and the curiosity, I think, is just such a beautiful way of. If we can get into that curious mind, right, that's just going to free up a portion to give hope, right? Yeah. Like that's where.
And the curiosity is what gets us away from. So when we talk about anxiety, depression, all the other, the withdrawal from society in any way, that is our threat response, like our nervous system sensing threat, and then going into the flight or the freeze, where we become inactive or we withdraw, which is anxiety and depression.
Right.
And the alternative is to get into fight. And this goes back to one of the things we talked about, which is the creative conflict. I can't remember what the title of that session was, but we talked about, conflict doesn't have to be negative, and we actually need conflict, but we need the creative conflict, the constructive conflict, which requires specific skill sets, which includes working with our emotions, especially fear and anger. Because if we're in a real serious exploration phase with people we don't necessarily like or respect, which is what we have to do to hear other perspectives, we have to really have a skill set to be able to do that, right? Yeah. And so that, I think that idea of really learning how to engage in creative conflict, and not just learning how to engage in it, but actually thriving in it. And it's not always fun, but it can be very fun if you know how to do it. I think that's really one skill set that we need to move into the future.
Yeah.
And then I guess our last portion is, how do we prepare for this? Like, we started to talk about curiosity, but how do we feel that we're going to prepare for 2024?
Ooh.
You've already started doing some preparing. Like I was
a little bit. Yeah, I mean a little bit for sure. Mostly because I've just become so aware of all the residue that,
Mm.
you know, like
Yeah.
all the stuff that I've been dragging around with me for years and years and years. I just,
All those monkeys,
and
he's getting off his back,
exactly.
flying off his
The
back.
monkeys that are flying off my back. Yeah, it's all that stuff that I've been dragging around with me for years and years and years, and
Yeah.
it's just so interesting because you're right. Like when I think of polycrisis, I think, you know, wow, that's heavy. Like that's really, really heavy, and I'm going into this next year a lot lighter than I was before, and I'm going to need it. Like, and I think everyone's going to need it. Like everyone's going to need to go in lighter, because if we carry around our old crap, then we're not going to have space to deal with this very, very rapidly changing environment and world. Not just environment like the, you know, the environment, but this rapidly changing world in which we all live and work and love and exist and pray and all the other things that we do that make life meaningful.
Joanne, what about you?
I I think for 2024, I think you were talking about it earlier, Katrina, when we were talking about transforming the way that we think, that the way that we are, and all that stuff. And for us to be in this polycrisis, or to get through this polycrisis, we have to fundamentally change some really core beliefs that we have. And so, and it's like, it's that this whole aspect of the more story, for example, right? You know, this whole consumption, we have to consume. You know, we need to, it's like we have to change our fundamentally how we think about and work with things and buy things and produce things as organizations. And there's just so much that's there. So I think that for me, I want to strive towards, I'm really curious about how and what is required, or that I can do just locally with myself or whatever, so we can change some of those behaviors. But the other aspect, I think that, and maybe more so than that, is this aspect of hope, right? So how can I show up in a way that will allow for hope for others, right? So that they can see the possibility that there is some hope, right? And so, you know, to kind of like free their minds so that they can actually look at other opportunities, because fearing people right now is not going to serve us at all. And I know, Kat, you're talking about trauma. You know, we talked about trauma just last week when we were all meeting in person. And it's another thing to kind of, I'm really interested and curious about that now, because I think we're getting into possible areas that I've not been involved in. So understanding how to handle that and work with trauma a little bit more. And so, and being in spaces where we can have these great conversations about climate or these polycrises, which I think is super important for what we're getting into. I'm just looking at the time, it's 7:28, but Kat,
go ahead.
Yeah, sorry.
We're going to go a little longer today.
I think we are.
Yeah.
It's the end of the year.
Let's just own that. We're going to go a little long today.
Thank you. It's such a great conversation.
Yeah. I'm still going to try and keep it short. I'm going to put forward a framework that I use, that I've developed. I don't know if I've developed it. It's my words. We need to have a palliative, a healing, and an envisioning approach. The palliative is what we've talked about, which is the palliative is actually more the dealing with things in the moment. Like, how do we get through the moment? How do we respond to the crisis of the moment? The healing piece is the trauma piece, and that's where I've spent a lot of time doing a lot of research over decades. How do we change the patterns that we come in with, which determine how we see the world, how we relate to other people, how we interpret information, how we respond, right? So trauma informs any old patterns, any patterns that we've learned over our lifetime will inform how we act, how we think, how we behave. And trauma kind of distorts that. And trauma, the definition of trauma that I really like, and I think I said it on a previous podcast that we had, trauma, the definition that I like is when your nervous system response is maladapted, is the technical term.
Yeah.
So it means that we're overreacting or underreacting to the actual threat that's in front of us. And it's because we're coming with historical patterns that make us look at something and overestimate what the real risk is or underestimate what the real risk is. Yeah.
Mhm.
And to rebalance our nervous systems is actually a somatic, it's a physical process. It's not a cognitive process.
Mhm.
So the healing piece is learning the skills of doing that so that we can actually really show up in the moment with appropriate patterns and becoming aware when maybe our patterns might be outdated and then updating those whenever necessary. Yeah.
Mhm.
And really doing that a continuous conscious process. And then the envisioning is really how do we then also, and this is something that in the trauma world, they don't talk about this enough, which is then how do we envision the future that we really want? And that's sort of more of a strategic piece, but it's more than just, it's more than the way most people talk about strategy. I really, having an executive MBA and having spent a lot of time in business and business schools, I think the way we talk about strategy is really flawed. And I think this is where people who are agile, like have agile training and have worked in agile environments, or like me, people who come from the entrepreneurial environment, we have a huge advantage because we approach strategy intuitively in a very different way. And it really is a matter of what's really possible.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of times we don't spend enough time doing that. We're always sort of in this reactive response as opposed to proactive response. And that's the piece that we need to get into.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's I love that. And that's probably a really good segue to, our interesting little plan. Who wants to talk about the interesting little plan? Because
Joanne?
I'm anxious. I
Yeah.
really want to know.
Joanne, do you want to jump
So,
in?
yeah, so we have a very interesting plan.
Yeah. It's called diving into the deep end and hoping to hell we can swim.
Oh, we can swim. We've
I
done it
know
so
we
many
can.
times. We can too down.
We're agile and entrepreneurial. Of course we can.
We're adaptive. We love going into the cold water. We're
Exactly.
good.
Yeah.
On March 2nd of this next year, Todd, Kat, and I are going to be doing a workshop. So I think it's Saturday, right? Saturday, March 2nd.
Yep.
And what we want to know from you guys is and we and actually we hold a question
Yeah.
for March 2nd and even for all of next year.
Yeah.
And what we want to know is what kind of question do you hold in yourself that you would like to explore for 2024, right?
Mhm.
And we want to know a little bit more. When I think of that, exploring that question, I'm sure that there's a reason why you want to explore that question.
Mhm.
It could be so that, you want to make a bigger impact in your workplace or make a bigger impact in sustainability or, family relationships or whatever it is. But I'm very curious about what that is, that question that you're trying to, that you're holding on to your mind, that you want to experiment in, or you want to learn more about for next year, or you want to solve. And that we're curious for what you may have what that may be an answer for you. So
and many ways to contribute that. In the comments, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, in the comments for this video, if you're watching on YouTube, then in the comments of the video section on the YouTube channel, or even direct messages on LinkedIn if you're attached to any one of the three of us in LinkedIn, because we'd love to hear your ideas, to hear what's important for you, what you're curious about, if you will, as we go into 2024, because I think it's going to be a really fun workshop. I'm looking forward to it. and maybe it'll be the first of many. Wouldn't that be exciting?
That would be really fun.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
I think the key thing that we're trying to get to is really fostering community discussions much more practically, and not just community discussions in terms of what often happens in education and happens in so many other places, which is more knowledge, right?
Mhm.
Like opening up the brain, pouring a bunch of stuff in, shutting the brain, shaking it up, and hoping something comes out. And it's like, we don't work that way,
That's just a
right?
vision. No.
um, it's really, we're now moving into this era where the next few years, possibly the next few decades are going to be terrifying at times.
Yeah. Yeah.
For some people more than others. And the only way that we're going to get through and succeed and survive, I really do think this is down to survival now. But I don't want to just survive. I want to leave the world in a way where people can truly thrive.
Yep.
And I think that's sort of all three of us are sort of on that page, right?
For sure.
And the
Yeah.
only way we're going to get there is through collective action, through collective
Mhm.
growth, through collective exploration, through collective experimentation. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's the only way we're going to get there. And I think that's sort of what our intention is. How do we really foster that community?
Mhm.
And that's sort of what we're thinking about with the workshop and also the podcast and everything else that we're doing.
Mhm.
And what do
Absolutely.
people need in order to do that?
Yeah.
What are their questions?
Yeah.
What will keep them coming?
Because we know from the interaction that we've had
Hmm.
with all of you, and when I say all of you, I don't just mean the three of you. I mean everyone who's listening to us now too.
Yeah.
That there's a wealth of ideas. Like
Mhm.
there's a wealth of ideas, and they're so good,
And a wealth of questions as well.
Yeah, and what a great opportunity to create
Mhm.
that community, that thrivingness.
Yeah.
That will be the hallmark of the future.
Yeah.
I think
It's
fantastic.
interesting. I call them wicked sustainability leaders.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I want badass leaders.
Yeah.
Like I want the ones that are
Yep.
curious as to how to make a difference and what and that they want to make that impact, right?
Yeah. And a bunch of them are listening to us right now.
They are.
Yep.
They want to make that difference, and
Yep.
and I am so ready to kind of
Yep.
to be there to kind of like figure out what we need to do together. And it
Yep.
is in the collective, it is in the collaborative, it is in a lot of that space.
Totally.
Diversified, right? Yeah.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned. It's coming.
So
Hey.
what is our wisdom for 2024?
Yep. Last words. What in fact are our last? Here, I'm going to bring the banner back. What are our last words of 2023?
Yeah.
I would use those three words that I used before, which is the palliative, healing, and envisioning.
Mhm.
Palliative of take care of yourself in the moment, do for yourself what you need to do.
Mhm.
The healing is really do the work that's required so that you no longer live in shame, no longer live in unnecessary fear,
Mhm.
and that you can really love much more fully, much more wholly.
Yep.
And then the envisioning of how do we actually get to a place where we really are truly thriving, and many more of us, not just the limited number of people that have been thriving, but how do we create a truly thriving world?
Mhm.
And with joy and love.
Mhm.
Yeah, joy and love are words that keep coming up for me. We really need that.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Joanne, or do you want me to? Or
Yeah,
I can.
you
You
go.
can.
Yeah,
me?
you go. Tess.
All right. So here's what I got, because what's coming up for me is I might be stealing this from Star Wars, but whatever.
It's a good source.
With everything that you're talking about, Kat, what's coming up for me is that what we will be facing is a revolution of some sort.
Yes.
And for a revolution to be successful, one of the most important ingredients is hope.
Yeah.
And in order for there to be hope, I believe there must be curiosity.
Yeah.
So that's what I've got. Those are my last words for 2023.
Hmm.
I think it's a good way to go into 2024.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we can just drop. That was beautiful. The
Mhm.
words that I chose: active hope.
Active hope. I like that a
Yeah.
lot.
And and it's not about just having hope, but it's actually acting on it.
Yeah.
Right. And
Do something with it.
Yeah, and small or big, wherever you're at, you know, just in motion. If we can move, if we can talk about this,
Yep.
if we can, you know, so for me, and I'm seeing it, and that's the things that I've been seeing all year long
Mhm.
with our conversations and the conversations I'm having with people all over the world. I'm seeing more of this, right? More people
Yeah.
Mhm.
that are really passionate about making a change, making a difference, and they indeed are actively doing something. So
Mhm.
for me, it's about having that active hope
Mhm.
Love
to move us forward.
Wow.
And
And with that,
What
yeah.
a nice way to wrap it up. I
I think
love
we
those
did.
words.
Yeah.
And so we are signing off for this year of the podcast. So thank
Yeah.
you all
Indeed.
for joining us.
And
Happy
yeah, can't wait to hear
holidays.
from everyone. And happy holidays.
Yeah.
Safe, peaceful,
Rejuvenating.
rambunctious, joyful, whatever it is you like. I hope that it's cold and windy or warm and sunny, whatever you like best. Yeah,
And see everybody in the new year.
absolutely.
All right. Looking
Yep.
forward to it.
Yeah,
Signing off.
January. Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.